Welcome to the Eudaemon, or as my friends call it, Eudaeman. Commentary on the Daily Demon, one of the internet's longest continuously running blogs. Philosophy, religion, current events, even some politics. All from a Catholic perspective.
I'm his daughter Meg. I'm his daughter Tess. We listen to every episode 5 times.
Alright, welcome to this week's podcast. Got quite a bit in store. A little more David Hume's Black Swan. All sorts of stuff. But right out of the box, I'm going to come out and call myself an idiot. My son Alex informed me that I referred to Persephone, the Greek goddess, as Persephone, which I used to refer to it that way, but I've known for years that's not accurate. Especially since I read a ton of Greek mythology while growing up, and even the high school and some in college, which I guess was fitting because back then when I used to flex, the girls used to say I looked like Zeus. Anyway, that's kind of embarrassing, the fact I mispronounced that. My apologies. Alex also tells me that I'm an ass because now we're probably going to get punished with a November 15th snowfall because of my gaffe. A few other mistakes. Son Jack tells me I referred to Pope Francis as Saint Francis. That's embarrassing for obvious reasons. The continuing theme on the Daily Demon is the Black Swan and other things talked about or written about by Nassim Taleb. And I made an allusion to it a couple weeks ago when I talked about David Hume talking about induction. And I just thought I'd clarify. David Hume was a 18th century philosopher who basically said, okay, all you scientists, he said a lot of things, but in particular he said, okay, you scientists out there, you keep telling us that this is true, this is true, this is true based on your experiments, but you don't know from a series of experiments that the next experiment is going to be the same thing. So, by way of illustration, you might flip a nickel 10,000 times, it'll come heads every single time. And the scientist says, oh, must be this nickel only comes up heads. Well, then you might flip it the 10,001st time, it comes up tails, and now all the experimentation has just been blown out of the water. Nassim Taleb uses this in the Black Swan, basically saying for years everyone thought swans are only white, because that's all they ever saw were white swans, and then boom, one day, I believe it was in Australia, someone saw a black swan. And that then disproved the scientific fact, or what they thought was a fact, the scientific fact that all swans are white, and that's a black swan. The black swan is something that destroys all scientific conclusions, and those scientific conclusions can be in any area, including Nassim Taleb's specialty, which is economics, or the economy, or finances. And he says you have black swan events that come and blow things up, and all the experts who knew all the data were completely worthless in forecasting it because of David Hume's The Problem of Induction. All that accumulated evidence doesn't mean anything when a black swan event comes along. And that's really all there's to it. Again, it's a key concept to grasp, I think, in this modern era, in an era when, information is so uncertain and everyone thinks they're an expert on something, and really no one's an expert on anything, because as David Hume points out, all your expertise is based on past experience, and there's no guarantee that past experience is going to come true the next day, and something always comes along and destroys it. You could then jump forward to like postmodernism, which says there's never any truth ever. Thaddeus Russell, one of the biggest proponents or pop proponents of postmodernism, I've heard go so far as to say that at some point trees might give birth to human beings. So he goes, I won't even take the fact that trees can't give birth to human beings. I will not accept that as a scientific fact. I think that's a little extreme. I'm still kind of working out in my own head those type of issues, but there is a lot to it. And again, it points to the problem of science, especially then when science tries to move beyond itself into realms of religion and other areas. It's a very effective stick to beat back scientists with. I realize I may have left you hanging there just a little bit at the end of that last segment. The reason the problem of induction is effective to beat back scientism with is because it shows that science itself is an act of faith. It's an act of faith that the scientific experience will keep on repeating themselves forever. Even though we realize that so many scientific truths are disproven and they're not truths at all. So the scientist has just as much faith as a religious person. One listener suggested that the topic in the last couple of podcasts, the topics have been a bit too serious with no humorous interlude. Asked me to try to alleviate that, which I will. One of my specialties in drinking conversation is the rant. I'll just start ranting on something that bugs me. The problem with the rant is if you don't see me smiling, you don't see them kind of playing it up and basically going overboard with my criticism to make a point that I believe in, but being especially obnoxious about it. So I don't necessarily want to go onto the rant, but I might do a little bit of it here. Now, I want to rant against Neil Diamond's Sweet Caroline. Now, I was a Neil Diamond fan back when it wasn't cool to be a fan. Back in college, at the University of Michigan, I used to listen to a lot of Neil Diamond. My roommate actually liked him as well, so that made it easier for me. To this day, I still listen to Brother Love's Traveling Salvation Show. It's one of my favorite songs of all time. just kills me. But Sweet Caroline has been beaten into the freaking ground. No longer should anyone sing bong, bong, bong. It's just not cool anymore. It's just that had the hell beat out of it. I mean, I'm sure at one point, the high five was really cool, but you don't see people doing that anymore. If you do, they're kind of, cultural Neanderthals. So I'll just beg everyone out there, stop with the Neil Diamond, Sweet Caroline, the bonk, bonk, bong. Just stop it. It's worn itself out. Alright. Hope you like that music. That's a Blue Wave Theory. Pretty cool song. I've always been a big fan of surf rock. Kind of limited doses. You can't listen to it too long. Kind of like polka music. It's good for a while. By the way, that last segment, I like Neil Diamond. I loved Sweet Caroline. Don't get me wrong. It's just played itself out. It's just been overdone, like so many things in our culture. It's time to move on. It's just not cool anymore. That's all I'm saying. Nothing against the song itself. In fact, it's kind of a tribute to the song that got overplayed and got overused. That's a tribute to the song of Neil Diamond, so don't freak out on me if you're a big fan. Alright, this is probably the feature part of this week's segment. On Saturday, I posted a link to an article where the writer makes reference to liberal totalitarianism. And that kind of interested me. His whole point is that basically everything in society is subjugated to political ends, and he's absolutely right. And again, I'm going to take a shot at the liberals, but and I'm going to flush this out. Don't think this is a conservative liberal type thing. And I'll explain to you where I'm coming from with all this. But the left politicizes everything: movies, NFL, TV shows, homecoming, prom. Everything's got to be politicized for the left, and it's very frustrating. But there's a reason for it, and I want to kind of flush it out in this segment. The best people who've written about this that I know of, I mean, a ton of people have, but Eric Vogelin, who I've mentioned before, but that's a pretty big corpus of work. If you want one book that kind of spells this out, I'd go with Henry de Lubac, D-E space L-U-B-A-C, and if I'm butchering that name, my apologies. He was I believe he was a German theologian, possibly by time, but pretty sure he was a German theologian, mid-20th century. And he wrote a book called The Drama of Atheist Humanism. And I think that's an important enough book that I actually went to the Notre Dame library, because it was out of print for years. I went to the Notre Dame library, found it, bought a copy card, and copied it page by page by page. Probably a gross violation of the copyright held by the English translator, but I couldn't find it anywhere. This was before Amazon. Now you can go to Amazon. Ignatius Press has reissued it, and you probably get it, on your Kindle for $9.99. I think I ended up paying over $100 by the time I drove to Notre Dame and copied it and everything. Anyway, it's a great book. De Lubac, he goes through, and I couldn't find it. I went through all the effort to get the book, and now I can't find it. But my recollection is he basically goes to the thought of Feuerbach, Marx, and Comte, and shows that the effort was to create a society without God. Feuerbach taught the concept of alienation, which is that humans just project all their best qualities onto God, and thereby alienate those best qualities from the earth into the transcendental, which Feuerbach didn't accept. So he said that's a bad thing. We need to reclaim those quote-unquote transcendental properties back for the earth. Marx then applied Feuerbach and said, yeah, when we do that, we can create the earthly utopia here on earth. Auguste Comte basically applied that and said, okay, well, if we're going to do that, we need to basically get rid of all the religious symbolism, specifically Catholic type stuff. Get rid of it, because Catholicism kind of directs all these things that could be used for the earthly paradise. It directs it towards the next life, the pie in the sky type stuff. And so, Comte said, let's just replace all the religious imagery with social imagery. And I can't give any actual examples, but instead of a feast day of St. Francis, which we'll be discussing here in this segment, we replace it with feast day of the sun or something like that, or maybe a tribute to animals. And if you see some parallels here with modern Earth Day and nature worship, yeah, you're not far off. Anyway, this goal to remake the earth, remake the world, means you have to remake society. It's not just a political thing. You have two fundamentally different notions. One, there is a transcendental, there is a God, there is a soul, there is an afterlife, there is eternity, or in our case, eternity. We have a beginning but no end because of our soul. Or there ain't. Okay, these are two conflicting worldviews, and they really cannot be reconciled. And it's the goal to get rid of the transcendental. That is the liberal tradition. Okay, and let that sink in. That is the liberal tradition. That's why, as Catholics, we oppose it. Again, in this current political milieu, that can be grossly misunderstood, but it is somewhat true. Not every liberal hates God, okay? But the liberal tradition does hate God. Make no doubt about it. And you can go back to Voltaire, who was part of that liberal tradition, hated the Catholic Church, pretty sure he's an atheist, maybe just agnostic, but the liberal tradition is imbued with atheism. And that's why de Lubac talks about the drama of atheist humanism. And again, not all liberals think this way today. I'm not saying that, but that's in the tradition. You further need to understand, again, these worldviews are completely incompatible. There really is no reconciling. It'd be similar if I have a friend who really wants to sleep with my wife, and he says, "Hey, if I'm your friend, you'll let me bang your wife." And I'm just like, no, I mean, that's not what friendship means. I'm not going to do it. And he said, well, yes, it is. And I say, no, it's not. Well, that's going to end the friendship, okay? Because we have two complete irreconcilable views of how friendship should be. Mine says, no, it doesn't extend to banging my wife. He says, yes, it does. We can't reconcile those two views. It's over. I can't say, well, you can bang my wife a little bit. No, it's just, those are two incompatible things. And that's the way it is with the Christian worldview and the liberal worldview. Ultimately, they cannot be reconciled. Politics cannot reconcile them. That leads me then to libertarianism. Okay? Because if the government is big, which it is, it's massive. I mean, and again, I'm going to touch on this at the end of this segment. If the government is big or massive in our case, the stakes are huge for these competing worldviews. You have to have your guy win, because if you don't, the guy who wins is 100% opposed to your worldview. And that, it becomes a death struggle in politics, and you're seeing that now. You're seeing it with the Kavanaugh nominations. Everything becomes a death struggle because everything is political, and the political swallows everything. The libertarian says, just shrink government. Get rid of government to the furthest extent possible, and then it's not that big of a deal. We're all doing our own thing. And it doesn't really matter who's in power, because so there's some arch liberal in power. I don't care, you can't do much to me, because his power is so limited. And the liberal can say, well, you got some priest, and yes, a Jesuit priest in power as a president now. That can't happen, by the way, but let's say it could. I don't care. I mean, you can't really do anything to me because the government's not that big. So that's why, one of the big reasons I'm a libertarian, is this, it just makes the government, if the government's so big, it makes its incompatible worldviews, a war zone. Okay? I don't want to hate my liberal brethren. Okay? I want to love them. I know a lot of my liberal brethren like me just fine in person. You always hear that, by the way. Oh, he's fine in person, but boy, his politics, it's just like, it shouldn't be that big of a deal. I should be able to have liberal friends. They should be able to have me as a Catholic friend. And it doesn't really matter. But when you're endorsing a political candidate who threatens their very essence, what they believe in, as what goes right to the center of their soul, it becomes a big freaking deal. Well, if you're libertarian, and there is no government to speak of compared to today's levels, those battles go away. And that's a big reason why I am a libertarian. It's also, by the way, a reason that the libertarian tradition is quite often a conservative tradition. You go back and look at Frank Chodorov and Albert J. Nock and those sorts. They call themselves classical liberals, which means like libertarianism, but in today's milieu, it's not. I mean, it's not liberalism in the sense of the liberal atheistic tradition, because libertarian says don't politicize everything, don't remake the world, let people just remake themselves and let the chips fall where they may, and that's antithetical to the liberal tradition. And again, at a future podcast, I probably will get into what's called the classical liberal tradition, which comes from Herbert Spencer in the 19th century, possibly John Stuart Mill. I'll get into that as well, and I'll try to reconcile these terms, but that's all you need to know for today's episode. All right, let's end on a lighter note. Welcome to Saint Week. As I've mentioned previously, October is one of the best months of the year when it comes to feast days. On Monday of this week, October 1st, we have St. Therese Lisieux. If you've never read A Story of a Soul, get a good translation, read her thought process. I firmly believe that St. Therese Lisieux came along at a particular time for a particular reason, and her little way of holiness is, I think crucial in this age of constant distractions and high stress levels. On Thursday, October 4th, you have St. Francis of Assisi, everyone's favorite saint. I got St. Thomas the Apostle in here. And then on Saturday, you got St. Bruno. And not many of you know St. Bruno, but he founded the Carthusians. If you ever get a chance, check out a movie called Into Great Silence. This filmmaker he asked for permission to go to the Grand Chartreuse, I'm not sure I'm pronouncing that correctly, in France, and just film the monks there. And it took him, he asked for permission, then like 17 years later they said yes. So it's like time stands still there, and 17 years is probably a quick response for the monks at the Grand Chartreuse, but it was 17 years. in our time, so to speak. But he goes there and he just films. I've had other people watch this and they're shaking their head as to why in the world I like it. I've watched it, I don't know, 3 times. Just absolutely love it. There's no talking to speak of. A little bit, they have some interviews with the monks there, but mostly it's just filming the goings on in this majestic monastery, and I definitely highly recommend it. But without Saint Bruno, whose feast day is October 6th, you wouldn't have it. Now, to my Protestant listeners out there, don't be offended by the feast day concept and saints in general, and we can get into the more intimate theological issues. But saint veneration is not the core of Catholic teaching by any stretch, and at a bare minimum, you can participate with this just by thinking you're going to go ahead and you can read about the lives of the saints, and learn how to act, how to behave. And that's really a core of what we have with the saints. And forget about praying to the saints. Again, we can discuss that later. But it's really no different than if you read a biography of a great man or woman, and you read this biography and you're inspired by it. That's all the lives of the saints really are. And there's no reason that a Protestant can't read about the lives of the saint and be true to their own tradition. There are some questions about spiritual development, and advancing the soul's status, like while on earth, that might conflict with certain Lutheran type beliefs that basically we're all dung and we can't develop at all. I guess there's some of that, but just looking at how the saints themselves lived, though, should and could inspire anyone of any religious background, even Buddhist or something else. Alright, that's it for this week's episode. Hey, do me a favor, let's get the word out about the Weekly Demon, if you don't mind. I've done virtually nothing to try to expand the listenership, other than posting to my blog and telling people I talk to, like friends and family, and some acquaintances as well who I think might like it. But if you could start tweeting it, putting it on Facebook, telling your friends, I'd greatly appreciate it. With this new formatting, I think I'm comfortable trying to push it to a broader audience. So I guess we'll see what happens. Have a good week, everyone.